I hate cycling. So here we are in week 8 of the training block, and I'm back on the static bike. It's Thursday, and in a normal week I'd have done a session on the Tuesday, and then today would be a nice easy lunchtime run. But here I am on the bike doing my first exercise of the week. Why is that? If we rewind back to week 7 of the block, those of you that watched the last video will know that I rounded out the week with a Sunday long run, bringing me to my second consecutive 50-kilometre week. And that's the first time I've strung 2 weeks like that together in a long time. Although my body was aching a little bit and telling me that I'd done those miles, I felt good and I was confident going into week 8 that I could push on for the last 3 weeks of the block. But come Monday morning, I felt a tightness in my Achilles, and although in isolation it wasn't anything to worry about, it put me into a little bit of a mental spiral, and I started doing that horrible thing that us runners do sometimes and catastrophizing about how it was going to get worse, it was going to end my training block, or worse, I wouldn't even make it to the start line, let alone the finish line of my half marathon. So I rationalised it, but took the precaution of hitting it with some ice and some ibuprofen, hoping that things would ease and that I hadn't done any real damage. Then Tuesday came round, and although things hadn't gotten any worse, they hadn't really gotten any better. And also over the course of Tuesday and Wednesday, I got this creeping discomfort into my left inner thigh. It's a weird one because it's an area that's never given me any trouble before. And it hadn't given me any trouble after any of my runs either. So the fact that it was starting to sneak in more than 48 hours after my last run seemed a bit odd. So anyway, as a precaution, I've booked myself in with my physio Andy, and I'm going to go and see him tomorrow morning. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep things ticking over on the bike. And don't worry, any kind of cross training I do on a bike will always be in the static one here or at the gym. I'm not about to start pedaling around the place in branded Lycra. Anyway, as I mentioned, Thursday's normally an easy run day for me. So this is just a nice easy ride, and it's not causing me any pain at all. So I'll finish up this ride and I'll take you with me to the physio tomorrow. Morning. So I'm on my way to the physio now, and I've held off running for 4 days. The pains that I've been experiencing are definitely easing, so hopefully that's a good sign. I mentioned a lesson I've learned in a previous video. I think the lesson learned here is that I need to dial up the intensity or the volume of training in any given week, and not both. So this week I've been a bit worried I learned that lesson a little bit too late, or maybe even not at all. I think I might have made that classic Simon error of getting a bit too carried away with what my body's capable of as soon as I started feeling good. No! The gradual onset of this inner thigh pain is still an odd one though, so hopefully my man Andy's got some answers for me. Let's go and find out. Every Friday, Andy is based out of Exeter Physio, so that's where I headed. Then after a mobility check to make sure there was nothing untoward going on with my skeleton or any of my joints, he got to work on the affected areas, starting with my right calf and Achilles. Andy's great because he understands how important running is to me physically and mentally, particularly having a structured training block in place. So as well as the physical treatment he provides, we always discuss my training and bounce ideas off of each other. This was best demonstrated when I was unable to run at all for a while last autumn and winter, and he helped me work through that, showing me that there was a path to recovery and breaking it down into small steps before I was back on my feet again. But back to today's treatment, he worked on the calf for a while, got that all loosened up, and then turned his attention to my right thigh, where he found some tension in my adductors and another muscle, the name of which I can't remember. But I left the session feeling much more comfortable, looser, and confident that we had a plan in place to get me safely through the rest of my training block. Doesn't look like I've done myself a mischief. There obviously were some areas that Andy needed to work on, but his opinion seems to be that today's treatment and some nice lengthy stretching over the next few days should get me back to running pretty quick. So it's Saturday morning now, and I'm eager to get back into my running shoes after yesterday's good news. I'm heading down to my local pool for a swim. Side note, it's definitely less than an hour before I get in the pool. I'm having a banana. Don't tell my mum. Andy worked his magic yesterday, and he's definitely solved the issue I had with my inner thigh, because that feels absolutely fine now. But he got pretty deep into my right calf and soleus. There's still a little bit of tenderness there just from the treatment. So I'm going to head down to the pool, try and replicate some of the effort that I would have put into that run, hopefully without drowning. I've just got to the pool, and the plan is to do 400-metre warm-up, followed by 4 by 100 of 60 seconds rest, and another 4 by 50 metres, a little bit faster than that, again off 60 seconds rest. Well, that's another swim in the books. had to do it all to feel really, because I didn't have my watch configured correctly, and obviously can't really check my heart rate anyway mid-length. It turns out that swimming feels a lot harder than your heart rate would suggest. I don't swim very often, but when I do, I always enjoy it. The admin of getting to the pool, getting changed, drying off afterwards and getting home, etc. does make it a bit of a faff, but it's a really good way of cross-training. And I find it really helps strengthen muscles like the adductors that sometimes I can neglect in my S&C. And that's the area that's been giving me a bit of jip this week. So it felt really good to get in the pool and not have any problems from it.
After my swim, I headed home and stretched out all those muscles that a session in the pool reminded me I don't use very often.
For the rest of the weekend, we headed to Cardiff to visit some friends, and on Sunday morning, I got out for my first run of the week. Nothing taxing, just some easy to steady kilometres to make sure that my physio treatment had done the trick and give myself the all clear to get back into training next week. Look at all this lovely wild garlic. It smells amazing. It's making me pretty hungry too.
So, I've finished my run, I'm back at my mate's house. I've got the luxury of a hot tub, sitting relaxing. Good news was no major flare-ups during that run, and absolutely nothing from that left adductor, so that's pleasing. And there was just a bit of awareness, I guess, a sensation in that right calf and Achilles, but nothing that stopped me running at a nice steady pace. So that's good news, but for now, back to the bubbles.
So I'm back in Exeter, and after a few hours stuck in traffic, I've come out to stretch my legs in the last of the evening sunshine. The learning curve of this training block continues to be steep, and that means I'm probably going to need to introduce a little bit more cross training and maybe reduce the volume of running for the rest of this block. It might not be what I had on the plan originally, but with 3 weeks to go until race day, probably need to strike a balance between continuing to build my fitness and sharpening up, but not taking any unnecessary risks. So if I'm going to use cross training more effectively for the rest of this training block, how do I know how much swimming and cycling I need to do? Well, a little bit of research suggests that every kilometre run equates to 4 kilometres on the bike, and conversely, every kilometre in the pool is the equivalent of 3 kilometres of running. Now there's a lot more science that can be applied to that, particularly when it comes to the percentage of your time in the pool or on the bike that you spend in various different heart rate zones. But for the purposes of the last part of this training block, those general rules of thumb will do me nicely and help me make that cross training more effective. And while that cross training allows certain muscle groups to recover slightly, I'll be making sure that I'm more disciplined with the fundamentals that I've let slip by the wayside a little bit over the course of this block, specifically doing my full stretching and mobility routines at the start and end of every day. So that was week 8. Hit that like button, and if this is the first video you've watched in the series, please consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss the rest. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy the rest of my weekend doing very little.